In the shadowed corridors of Windsor Castle, where centuries of royal secrets whispered through stone walls, Captain James Morrison thought he had seen everything. 23 years of protecting the British royal family had taught him to notice the smallest details: a nervous glance, an unusual gesture, a letter passed too quickly between hands. But nothing could have prepared him for what he would discover on that foggy November morning in 2019. What started as a routine security check would uncover a web of encrypted messages that challenged everything the world thought they knew about 8-year-old Princess Charlotte and 5-year-old Prince George. Behind their innocent smiles and carefully orchestrated public appearances lay a story so extraordinary that it would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. This is the true account of how two young royals, barely old enough to tie their own shoes, had been living double lives that would make even the most seasoned intelligence officers pause in amazement. It's a story of childhood brilliance, family secrets, and the lengths to which the palace would go to protect its youngest members from a world that was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Captain James Morrison had always prided himself on being observant. During his 2 decades of service with the Royal Protection Squad, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot anything out of place. That Tuesday morning in November 2019 started like any other day at Kensington Palace, with the familiar routine of security sweeps and coordination meetings. The fog hung thick over London as Morrison made his way through the palace corridors, checking the overnight reports from the night shift. Everything seemed normal until he reached the children's study room on the 2nd floor. The door was slightly ajar, which was unusual since Princess Charlotte and Prince George were supposed to be at their morning riding lessons with their grandmother, the Princess of Wales. As Morrison approached the door, he heard something that made him freeze in his tracks. It wasn't the sound of children playing or even crying. It was the rapid clicking of keyboard keys, followed by what sounded like a young girl's voice, speaking in what he could only describe as coded language. "The Eagle has landed in Sector 7, came Charlotte's unmistakable voice through the crack in the door. "George, confirm the butterfly sequence for tomorrow's tea party protocol." Morrison felt his heart rate quicken. In his years of service, he had heard enough intelligence briefings to recognize operational language when he heard it. But this was coming from an 8-year-old princess. He pressed his ear closer to the door, straining to hear more. Prince George's voice, still carrying the slight lisp of a 5-year-old, responded with surprising clarity. "Butterfly sequence confirmed. The cookies will be arranged in pattern Delta 7. Mummy's friend will receive the message during story time." Morrison's mind raced. What message? What friend? He had been briefed on every person who was scheduled to interact with the royal children that day, and there was no mention of any message delivery system, especially not one involving cookies and story time. Carefully, Morrison pushed the door open just enough to peer inside. What he saw made him question everything he thought he knew about royal protocol and child development. Princess Charlotte sat at a small desk with a laptop computer that definitely wasn't part of the standard educational equipment approved for the young royals. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with a speed and precision that would have impressed seasoned computer programmers. Prince George stood beside her, holding what appeared to be a hand-drawn chart covered with symbols and numbers. The chart looked remarkably similar to the encryption keys Morrison had seen during his brief stint with military intelligence before joining the Royal Protection Squad. "The castle guards are getting suspicious," Charlotte whispered to her younger brother, her eyes never leaving the screen. "We need to change the meeting location." "What about the secret passage behind the portrait of great-great-grandmother Victoria?" Morrison's blood ran cold. There was indeed a hidden passage behind that particular portrait, but it wasn't marked on any of the standard palace maps. Knowledge of its existence was limited to senior palace staff and family members who had lived in the palace for years. How did an 8-year-old know about it? George consulted his chart again, running his small finger along a series of symbols. "The passage is clear on Wednesdays between 2 and 4, but we need to make sure Captain Morrison is doing his rounds in the East Wing during that time." The mention of his own name merely caused Morrison to gasp out loud. Not only did these children know about secret passages, but they were also tracking his movements and incorporating them into their plans. Whatever they were planning, they had been studying the palace security routines with the dedication of professional operatives. Charlotte suddenly stopped typing and turned toward the door. For a moment, Morrison thought he had been discovered, but the young princess was looking at something on the opposite wall. "George, check the mirror signal from the garden tower." Morrison followed her gaze and noticed something he had somehow missed in all his years of security sweeps. There was a small mirror positioned on the windowsill, angled in such a way that it could reflect light from the specific tower in the palace gardens. As he watched, a series of light flashes came from the tower, 3 short, 2 long, 3 short again. SOS in Morse code, Charlotte said matter-of-factly, as if 8-year-old princesses regularly communicated in international distress signals. But it's not a real distress call. It's the all-clear signal from Nanny Margaret. Morrison's mind reeled. Nanny Margaret had been with the family for over 15 years and had clearance levels that even some security personnel didn't possess. If she was involved in whatever the children were doing, this situation was far more complex than a simple case of precocious children playing spy games. Charlotte returned to her typing, her young face displaying a concentration that seemed far beyond her years. The package will be delivered during tomorrow's public appearance at the Children's Hospital. Make sure the teddy bear with the blue ribbon is in position 3 of the gift presentation. Morrison watched as she pulled up what appeared to be architectural drawings of St. Mary's Children's Hospital on the computer screen. The drawings were detailed enough to show ventilation systems, security camera positions, and staff movement patterns. This level of intelligence gathering was sophisticated enough to rival professional surveillance operations. Prince George had moved to another computer and was typing with his own impressive speed, though still hunting and pecking with his small fingers. I've confirmed the backup route through the hospital's service corridors. If something goes wrong with the main plan, we can still deliver the message through the laundry delivery system. The casual way these children discussed backup plans and alternative delivery methods sent chills down Morrison's spine. He had spent years training in contingency planning and operational security, yet these 2 young royals seemed to have an intuitive grasp of concepts that took most adults years to master. Charlotte's fingers paused over the keyboard as she turned to look directly at the door where Morrison was hiding. For a terrifying moment, he thought she had spotted him, but she was looking at something else entirely. The morning shift change is happening in 5 minutes. We need to wrap this up before the new guards start their rounds. She was right. Morrison checked his watch and realized that the shift change was indeed scheduled for 5 minutes from now. These children weren't just aware of palace security routines, they were using that knowledge to time their activities with military precision. George had moved to what appeared to be a communications device that Morrison didn't recognize. It looked like a modified walkie-talkie, but with additional components that suggested a much more sophisticated piece of equipment. Eagle's Nest, this is Little Bear. Package preparation complete. Delivery schedule confirmed for tomorrow at 14:30 hours. A crackling voice responded through the device, but Morrison couldn't make out the words. However, Charlotte's response made it clear that they were receiving instructions from someone else in the palace. Understood. Eagle's Nest. We'll maintain radio silence until the operation is complete. George and I will proceed to writing lessons as scheduled to maintain our cover. Cover. Morrison felt as though he had stepped into an alternate reality where 8-year-old princesses spoke like seasoned intelligence operatives. The use of proper military time, code names, and operational terminology suggested a level of training that was both impressive and deeply troubling. As if responding to some unheard signal, both children began rapidly shutting down their equipment and clearing away their charts and documents. Charlotte closed the laptop and slid it into what appeared to be a hidden compartment in the desk that Morrison had never noticed before. George folded his charts into precise squares and tucked them into a secret pocket sewn into his jacket. Within 2 minutes, the room looked exactly as it should, like a normal study area for young royal children, complete with age-appropriate books, educational toys, and art supplies carefully arranged on the shelves. Morrison heard footsteps approaching from the other end of the corridor and realized he needed to move quickly to avoid being caught eavesdropping. As he quietly backed away from the door, he heard Charlotte's voice one more time, now speaking in the bright, cheerful tone expected of a young princess. "Come on, George. We mustn't be late for our riding lesson. You know how Grandmama doesn't like it when we keep the horses waiting." The door opened, and both children emerged, looking exactly like the innocent royal children that appeared in official photographs. Charlotte's hair was neatly braided, and she wore a proper riding outfit that would have satisfied the most demanding royal protocol officer. George held her hand with the trusting dependence typical of a 5-year-old, showing no sign of the operational sophistication Morrison had just witnessed. As they walked past him in the corridor, Charlotte looked up with the bright smile that had charmed the public since her birth. "Good morning, Captain Morrison. Isn't it a lovely day for a ride in the park?" The casual greeting, delivered with perfect innocence, left Morrison speechless. There was no indication that she knew he had been listening to their conversation. No sign of the calculated intelligence operative he had just observed. She was simply a polite young princess greeting a family employee, just as she had been taught. George waved shyly as they passed, still every inch the youngest royal child who occasionally sucked his thumb and carried a favorite stuffed animal to public events. The contrast between what Morrison had just witnessed and what he was seeing now was so dramatic that he almost convinced himself he had imagined the entire episode. But as the children disappeared around the corner with their accompanying nanny, Morrison noticed something that confirmed his worst fears. Charlotte had left behind a single piece of paper, apparently by accident. When he picked it up, he found himself holding a hand-drawn map of the children's hospital they were scheduled to visit the next day. The map showed details that could only have been obtained through professional reconnaissance, including guard positions, camera blind spots, and what appeared to be marked escape routes. At the bottom of the map, in Charlotte's careful 8-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Operation Teddy Bear, Phase 1 complete." Morrison spent the entire night staring at the ceiling of his apartment, unable to shake the image of Princess Charlotte's fingers flying across that keyboard and Prince George's surprisingly sophisticated understanding of operational security. The hand-drawn hospital map lay on his bedside table, a tangible reminder that what he had witnessed wasn't some elaborate daydream. By 6 in the morning, he had made his decision. He needed to understand what these children were really doing, and more importantly, who was training them. The level of sophistication he had witnessed suggested adult supervision, possibly from within the palace's most trusted circles. Morrison arrived at work 2 hours early, using his security clearance to access areas of the palace that were normally off-limits during nighttime hours. He started with the children's study room, conducting what he told himself was a routine security inspection, but was actually a thorough intelligence-gathering operation of his own. The hidden compartment in Charlotte's desk was more sophisticated than he had initially realized. When he examined it more closely, he found that it was actually a custom modification that had been professionally installed, complete with biometric locks that would only open to Charlotte's fingerprint. This wasn't the kind of modification that could be done without high-level authorization and considerable expense. Behind a loose panel in the wall, Morrison discovered a cache of equipment that would have impressed professional surveillance teams. There were miniature cameras, long-range listening devices, encrypted communication equipment, and what appeared to be a complete computer server setup that was somehow connected to the palace's main network without appearing on any official inventory lists. The most disturbing discovery was a series of files stored on an encrypted hard drive. Using skills he had learned during his military intelligence training, Morrison managed to access the files and found himself looking at detailed intelligence reports on everyone who had regular contact with the royal children. Teachers, staff members, visiting dignitaries, family friends, everyone had been thoroughly researched and catalogued with the kind of detail that suggested professional-level background investigations. One file particularly caught his attention. It was labeled Operation Guardian Angel and contained what appeared to be a comprehensive threat assessment of potential dangers to the royal family. The analysis was so sophisticated and thorough that it rivaled anything produced by the palace's official security teams. But what made Morrison's blood run cold was the realization that this assessment had identified several legitimate security concerns that the official teams had missed entirely. The file detailed a pattern of suspicious activities around the children's public appearances, including individuals who had appeared at multiple events without any obvious connection to the venues or causes being supported. There were photographs, license plate numbers, and behavioral analysis notes that demonstrated a level of surveillance awareness that shouldn't have been possible for children to achieve on their own. As Morrison continued reading, he began to understand the true scope of what Charlotte and George had been doing. They weren't just playing elaborate spy games. They had been conducting their own security operations, identifying potential threats and developing countermeasures to protect not only themselves but their entire family. The teddy bear operation he had overheard them discussing wasn't some innocent childhood game. According to the files, they had identified a credible threat related to their upcoming hospital visit. A man who had been dismissed from the hospital staff 6 months earlier had been making increasingly aggressive statements about the royal family on social media. Official security assessments had classified him as a low-level threat, but Charlotte and George's analysis suggested he posed a much more serious danger. Their plan was elegantly simple and terrifyingly effective. During the gift presentation at the hospital, Charlotte would ensure that a specific teddy bear ended up in the hands of a particular child patient. Hidden inside the bear was a miniature tracking device that would allow security teams to monitor the dismissed employee's movements if he attempted to get close to the children during their visit. Morrison sat back in his chair, struggling to process the implications of what he had discovered. These children had essentially been running their own intelligence operation within the palace, identifying threats that official security had missed, and developing solutions that were both creative and effective. But who was helping them? The equipment, the training, the access to sensitive information. None of this was possible without adult assistance at the highest levels. Morrison's investigation took on new urgency as he began to understand that he might be dealing with something far more complex than precocious children playing dress-up. His first suspect was Nanny Margaret, whose involvement in the children's activities had been clearly established by their radio communications. Margaret Fleming had been with the royal family for 15 years, joining when Prince William and Catherine were first married. Her background check had been thorough, revealing a former career in early childhood education and impeccable references from previous employers. But as Morrison dug deeper into Margaret's background, he found inconsistencies that his colleagues had somehow missed during the original vetting process. Her educational credentials, while legitimate, came from institutions that also happened to train intelligence operatives. Her previous employers, when contacted through unofficial channels, provided glowing recommendations that were almost too perfect, using language that suggested they might be providing cover stories rather than genuine employment references. The breakthrough came when Morrison discovered that Margaret's real name wasn't Margaret Fleming at all. Through a contact at Scotland Yard, he learned that she was actually Margaret Sinclair, a former MI5 operative who had been recruited to the Royal Protection Detail through channels so classified that even Morrison's security clearance wasn't high enough to access the full details. The revelation that the children's nanny was a trained intelligence operative put everything into perspective. Charlotte and George weren't just exceptionally bright children who had taught themselves spycraft. They were being trained by one of Britain's most skilled intelligence professionals, someone who had been specifically placed in their lives to prepare them for threats that official security protocols couldn't adequately address. Morrison's investigation led him to a shocking realization about the true nature of royal security in the modern age. The traditional model of bodyguards and security sweeps was no longer sufficient to protect high-value targets, like the royal children, from sophisticated modern threats. The palace had quietly implemented a new approach, training the children themselves to be aware of dangers and capable of protecting themselves when traditional security measures failed. But the program went far beyond simple self-defense or situational awareness. Charlotte and George were being trained as junior intelligence operatives, capable of conducting their own threat assessments and developing countermeasures that complemented official security protocols. Their innocent public appearances provided perfect cover for intelligence gathering activities that would have been impossible for adult operatives to conduct without arousing suspicion. The hospital visit was scheduled for the next day, and Morrison realized he was facing an ethical crisis that went to the heart of his professional responsibilities. The children's intelligence indicated a genuine threat that official security had underestimated. Their countermeasures were sophisticated and likely to be effective, but they were also operating without the knowledge or approval of the official security teams, creating the possibility of dangerous conflicts between different protective measures. Morrison spent hours agonizing over his decision. Should he report what he had discovered to his superiors, potentially compromising an operation that might save lives? Should he confront Margaret Sinclair directly and demand explanations that she might not be authorized to provide? Or should he trust in the judgment of experienced intelligence professionals and allow the children's operation to proceed as planned? The answer came to him as he watched Charlotte and George during their afternoon tea, observing how they interacted with visiting family friends. Even while engaging in perfectly normal childhood activities, they were constantly alert, noting details and filing away information with the automatic precision of trained observers. These weren't just children who had been taught some advanced skills. They had been fundamentally transformed by their training, developing capabilities that would serve them well throughout their lives as high-profile targets of international attention. The program that Margaret Sinclair was implementing wasn't just about protecting them from immediate threats. It was about preparing them for a lifetime of being among the most recognizable and vulnerable people on the planet. Morrison made his decision. He would not report the children's activities to his superiors, but he would quietly position himself to provide backup support if their operation encountered problems. The hospital visit would proceed as planned, with both official security and the children's own protective measures working in parallel, even if one hand didn't know what the other was doing. That evening, as he prepared his own security plans for the hospital visit, Morrison received an unexpected message on his encrypted communication device. The message was brief and unsigned, but the sophisticated encryption signature told him everything he needed to know about who had sent it. Captain Morrison, the message read, "Your discretion and professionalism have been noted and appreciated. Tomorrow's operation requires careful coordination between all protective elements. Your cooperation will ensure the safety of everyone involved." The message included detailed coordination instructions that would allow Morrison to position his official security team in ways that complemented rather than interfered with the children's own protective measures. Someone had been watching his investigation and had decided to trust him with knowledge of the program that was protecting Charlotte and George. As Morrison studied the coordination instructions, he realized that the rabbit hole went deeper than he had imagined. The message revealed that similar programs were in place for other high-profile royal children around the world, and that what he had discovered at Kensington Palace was part of a much larger international effort to adapt royal protection to the realities of modern threats. The children weren't just being trained to protect themselves. They were being prepared to take their places in a network of royalty who understood that their survival depended not just on traditional security measures, but on their own intelligence, awareness, and ability to operate effectively in a world where danger could come from any direction at any time. Morrison fell asleep that night with a new understanding of the children he had sworn to protect. They were still Princess Charlotte and Prince George, still children who needed love and guidance and the chance to experience normal childhood activities. But they were also something more, junior partners in their own protection, capable of identifying and neutralizing threats that traditional security measures might miss. Tomorrow's hospital visit would be his first chance to see how the two approaches to royal protection could work together. He only hoped that his years of training had prepared him for what was likely to be the most complex and challenging security operation of his career.